who is the special investigator who was tasked by the DOJ with checking into supposed Trump-Russia collusion in the last election cycle, he has now come out with some information and suggested that President Trump is not, in fact, a target of the investigation. And the rest of the left, the entire left, is now doing Bill Paxton from Aliens. Game over, man. Game over. They can't believe that Robert Mueller isn't going to come in Deus Ex Machina and oust President Trump from office with some sort of criminal indictment. Here's what the Washington Post reported that blew up the internet last night. Special counsel Robert S. Mueller III informed President Trump's attorneys last month that he is continuing to investigate the president, but does not consider him a criminal target at this point, according to 3 people familiar with the discussions. In private negotiations in early March about a possible presidential interview, Mueller described Trump as a subject of his investigation into Russia's interference in the 2016 election. Prosecutors view someone as a subject when that person has engaged in conduct that is under investigation, but there is not sufficient evidence to bring charges. The special counsel also told Trump's lawyer that he is preparing a report about the president's actions while in office and potential obstruction of justice, according to 2 people with knowledge of the conversations. Mueller reiterated the need to interview Trump, both to understand whether he had any corrupt intent to thwart the Russia investigation and to complete this portion of his probe, the people said. Mueller's description of the president's status has sparked friction within Trump's inner circle as his advisors have debated his legal standing. So the president, some of his allies, they apparently are seizing on Mueller's words as an assurance that Trump's risk of criminal jeopardy is low. But other advisors say, well, a subject can quickly become an indicted target. So there are a couple of questions here. And some good news for Trump and some bad news for Trump in this report from the Washington Post about what Robert Mueller is labeling Trump, a target, a subject, but not a target of the investigation. So point number 1. After a year of investigation, more than a year of investigation by the DOJ and about 9 months of investigation by Team Mueller, there is no evidence to indict Trump at this point. Right? There isn't. So all of the talk about how Trump is on the ropes and Trump is going to be ousted from office in a criminal investigation, there is not evidence at this point, which means that the only evidence that Mueller can get is from Trump himself. And this brings us, right here, this brings us to some of the bad news for President Trump. When Mueller says that President Trump is a target of a subject, but not a target of the investigation, what he means is that he's still looking at everything Trump is doing, but he doesn't have enough information to indict. That could change. And so what he could be doing here is making Trump feel comfortable. He could be saying to him, Mr. President, look, I don't have the evidence to indict you right now. I have no interest really in indicting you, but I need to talk with you to clarify. Trump would be a fool to get in a room with Robert Mueller and testify under oath. He would be, or even to talk to the FBI generally, because it's still a crime to lie to the FBI, even if you're not under oath. The reason is this. Let's say that right now, one of the things we know is that Mueller is doing 2 things. One is the possible criminal investigation against Trump for obstruction of justice. Now, as I've discussed on the program before, the case for obstruction against President Trump is particularly weak. It's very difficult for the President of the United States to obstruct justice when he is just firing members of the executive branch. The president has tremendous control over the executive branch, and firing anybody inside the executive branch, it's difficult to claim that there would actually be a solid case against President Trump. So I've done this before, but I'm going to do it again. Let me explain to you what obstruction of justice constitutes under federal law. So under 18 U.S. Code 1503, this is called the Omnibus Clause. Okay, it covers corruptly or by any threatening letter or communication influencing or impeding or endeavoring to influence, obstruct, or impede the due administration of justice. But the clause requires a pending judicial proceeding. There is no pending judicial proceeding right now. If there were a pending judicial proceeding, if, for example, Trump fired James Comey in order to protect Michael Flynn, then that would be one thing. But if he fired James Comey just because he got mad, or if he fired James Comey because he didn't want James Comey investigating him, then that would all be actually perfectly legal under this clause. It's only if there's a pending judicial proceeding and the president interferes with that pending judicial proceeding by firing someone maybe that you could theoretically say that's obstruction. Very difficult to make that case when the president obviously has the right to fire someone like James Comey, the former FBI director, who is underneath his rule, right, under his purview in the executive branch. Okay, another clause of federal law that's often used when you're talking about obstruction is 18 U.S. Code 1512C. This provision of law covers anyone who, quote, obstructs, influences, or impedes an official proceeding or attempts to do so. So it's not clear that an FBI investigation is an official proceeding. And more than that, you have to prove intent. So you have to prove that President Trump actually intended to obstruct the investigation. He wasn't just pissed at James Comey. I think, realistically speaking, that's exactly why he fired James Comey, the former FBI director. He was angry at him because he went to Comey. He said, why don't you just say I'm not under investigation? And Comey said, I don't want to say that. And Trump said, but I'm not, am I? And Comey said, right, you're not under investigation. Trump said, well, why don't you say that? And Comey said, I don't want to. And Trump fired him. Right? I mean, I think that's how things went down. final piece of the U.S. code that deals with obstruction of justice provision. This provision covers destroying evidence related to a federal investigation. It's 18 U.S. Code 1519. There are no accusations at this point that Trump has destroyed evidence of any kind. So, again, very difficult to make a criminal case on obstruction of justice against the president of the United States. However, even if Trump talks to Mueller and then he says something like, yeah, I fired Comey because I didn't like what he was doing with Flynn. Boom. Now you're talking about a possible obstruction of justice charge. Okay, it would be difficult to prove in court. It would be really out of the box for the president of the United States to be actually charged with obstruction of justice. Obstruction of justice was part of the impeachment proceeding, however, against Richard Nixon. And this brings us to the second point with regard to what Mueller is doing. So what Mueller is doing here, right, is he is compiling a report to issue to Congress. That seems to me perfectly appropriate, considering that this is basically a political issue, but I'm not sure that it was inside Mueller's purview in the first place. Now, Alan Dershowitz, who's a defense lawyer, obviously a Harvard Law School professor, he has suggested that Mueller is operating outside his purview. His purview is not to issue reports to Congress. His purview is not to issue intelligence or counterintelligence reports. His issue is to do a criminal investigation. Either he's got the goods or he doesn't. If he doesn't have the goods, then he should shut up. And that's Dershowitz's basic point here, is that every special counsel investigation has set parameters, and Mueller has exceeded those parameters. Other people who believe this, Andy McCarthy over at National Review, has made the same case, that Mueller's parameters have expanded and expanded and expanded. So now we're no longer talking about Trump-Russia collusion anywhere in here, right? Trump-Russia collusion has nothing to do with anything. Instead, we are now talking about something completely different, possible obstruction of justice by President Trump. According to the Washington Post, Mueller is drafting a large report that he's going to issue to Congress. And this, of course, will be a bombshell no matter what it says. If Mueller says, Trump acted improperly, but it's not criminal, then if Democrats win back Congress, they will attempt to impeach him. So here is why 2018 matters for Republicans if they don't want to see Trump impeached in the House. Now, the chances that he's impeached in the Senate are virtually nil, but he could be, or convicted in the Senate anyway, he could be impeached in the House if Democrats win back the Congress. And right now, the polls suggest that they are very likely to win back Congress, which means, let's say Mueller issues this report a few months down the road. Let's say he issues it in December. Let's say he issues it in September, and this becomes an issue. If he issues it before the election, Democrats will use this as elect us and we will impeach Trump, right? Hope will spring alive and anew for Democrats, and the turnout will be even greater than it otherwise would be because they will now have the grounds to go after President Trump. If he does it after the election and Democrats run the House, then there will presumably be some sort of impeachment proceeding because all they need is the drop of a hat and they're going to move to impeach Trump just because they don't like Trump. Doesn't matter that we've been hearing nothing about collusion. Doesn't matter that collusion was the buzzword for literally a year and a half here. None of that matters. They'll talk about obstruction. Sure, there was no collusion, but there was obstruction, and the president was acting in criminal fashion, and that means we have to impeach him. So this is why Trump should not talk to Mueller, because if he talks to Mueller, is there any doubt that if you're Trump's lawyer, you're just gritting your teeth the entire time? If you're Trump's lawyer, President Trump has an unfortunate habit of making loud, brash statements. You can't do that in front of lawyers. You do that in front of Mueller, and Mueller will catch you in a perjury trap faster than you can say boo. So there you actually do have criminal liability, right? There you actually have a problem. If Trump actually lies to the FBI, then you have a crime. But even if he doesn't lie to the FBI, if he provides any evidence that allows Mueller to suggest obstruction that's not quite criminal, but is uncomfortable and weird, then you could see Democrats move to impeach President Trump. And that, of course, is the end goal of so many of these folks. Yeah, this investigation is still dangerous. Now, does that mean that Trump should fire Mueller? No, because then there would presumably be an impeachment proceeding against Trump by the House anyway for obstruction. But at least we can fight back if the Mueller report proves to be particularly weak. Everybody who's jumping to conclusions, suggesting that Trump is off the hook now, that's not right. Everybody who's suggesting that this shows that Trump is on the hook, that's not right either. We don't have enough information. Trump needs to be protecting himself. And if Trump believes that this is going to let him off the hook, that everything's going to be fine, this is now in the political court. Okay, this is no longer in the legal court. It probably won't be in a legal court. It will be in the political court. And that could be a serious problem for President Trump. Although, I will say this, if the Democrats try to impeach Trump in 2018 and he doesn't get convicted in the Senate and he remains in office, how big is turnout going to be for Republicans in 2020? Right? Nothing was better for Bill Clinton than Republicans attempting to impeach him in 1998. His approval rating skyrocketed to 60%. So I think the same thing will happen with Trump? No, because I think Trump is a more polarizing figure on the American public scene, or at least people react to him in a more polarized way. But if Democrats try to impeach him on weak grounds, that would be a political mistake that could really hurt them in the re-elect effort in 2020.